Hello, I'm Dan Gibson, and this video is number 5 in the series The Qibla Story. So far, we have followed the Qibla story through the origins of Islam, the Kaaba in the city of Petra, the moving of the Black Rock to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, the between Qiblas of General Hajjaj, and the parallel and the Africa Qiblas in North Africa and Spain. And now we come to the period at the end of the Umayyad rule and the start of the Abbasid rule. This time period is full of conflict and confusion as the Islamic world slowly loses confidence in the Umayyad caliphs. Now, note that the story really centers on a man called Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, a small man with high aspirations. He started out as a school teacher in Medina. Eventually, he moved to Damascus, where he joined the caliph's bodyguard. From there, he worked his way into the caliph's personal presence, and for the rest of his life, he served the caliphs in Damascus. He was eventually given the title of Amir or General, and he led the army against Ibn Zubair in the Second Islamic Civil War. Later, after the war, he searched out people who had been opposed to the caliph, and he had them beaten, and in some cases, he had their heads chopped off. Hajjaj was faithful to the office of the caliph, and he supported each new caliph as they came along. In this way, the people learned to respect and to fear him. One time, a man asked for an exemption from the army because of a hernia. He was granted it, but when Hajjaj heard of it, he revoked the exemption. So a group of soldiers then rebelled against Hajjaj, so he had the leader killed, and the heads of the 18 rebel soldiers were then set on posts for everyone to see. On the other hand, Hajjaj highly praised those who fought well and who acted sacrificially for the army and the caliph. In the year 74 after the Hijrah, Hajjaj was made the governor of Iraq. He then put down many rebellions and helped solidify the rule of the caliph. Hajjaj proved himself to be a crafty general and skilled in understanding the character of people and how to manipulate them or motivate them to obey him. Hajjaj was a loyal servant. He was the most loyal servant that a caliph could wish for. In the end, Hajjaj's daughter wed Mansur, the son of Caliph al-Walid I, and the daughter of Hajjaj's brother, Muhammad, she was wed to the future Caliph Yazid II. They even named their firstborn son after Hajjaj. We know a lot about the relationship between Hajjaj and Caliph Abd al-Malik, as many letters survive that were sent between them. At the pinnacle of his power in 702, al-Hajjaj built the Wasit, or the Between Mosque, and he founded the city of Wasit around it, and he built a large prison there. Later historians would postulate that Wasit was midway between Basra and Kufa, these two cities, and that was the origin of the name. However, the distance from Kufa to Wasit is 174 kilometers, and from Basra to Wasit is 230 kilometers. It wasn't really in the middle, and it was like a great triangle. Al-Tabari tells us a different story. When Hajjaj was at a spot where Wasit was later built, he noted a local monk who was keeping the area clear and clean. When he asked the monk, he said that God had showed him that this area would be used for worship, as long as there remained on earth anyone who proclaimed his oneness. Al-Hajjaj then decided to build his mosque and his city on that spot. It had nothing to do with being halfway between Basra and Kufa, as later writers would claim. That was an invention, just to give some reason, some explanation why the mosque and the city were called Between. But now we know better. Hajjaj then set about bettering the eastern part of the Muslim empire. He introduced new coinage and he worked hard to improve agriculture. He also became involved in religious improvements. He set about introducing a uniform version of the Quran. He did this so some theological quarrels could be settled. The Byzantine rulers at that time taunted the Muslims, claiming that they knew that Hajjaj had made additions to the Quran. You see, he cleverly did not remove anything from the existing Qurans, but he did add little bits and pieces that have been lost. At least that is the theory. Along with this, he divided the text of the Quran into 30 parts and introduced new vowel markings. In doing this, he could slightly manipulate the meaning of the text to his favor and purge anything that might be hostile to the Umayyads or to himself. He declared this version of the Quran to be the only valid version of the Quran, and he prohibited the use of any other texts. His text became the standard use at that time. Well, not everyone agrees with vowel markings. When they were first introduced into Arabic, we know that Hajjaj insisted that they be used in official Arabic transcripts and in writing and communication to make the language clearer and more precise. Now, why do I tell you all of this? First, please note that Hajjaj had the power and the influence to make changes to the religion of Islam. And he did that by creating the between Qibla. Second, after he died, there was a great deal of disagreement over the changes he had made in Islam. Because he was so closely tied with the office of the Caliph, and for so long over the lives of various Caliphs, the Umayyad Caliphate was accused of tampering with Islam. This was one of the issues leading up to the Abbasids taking over, but only one of the issues. During Hajjaj's time, the Petra Qibla slowly passed out of use in Iraq and the Eastern Empire. A couple of new mosques were built in the west, particularly around the Petra area that still recognized the Petra Qibla. The last mosque was built facing Petra that we know of was in 126 after the Hijrah during the reign of Caliph al-Mansur. Back in the year 88 after the Hijrah, the Qibla wall in Medina had already been reoriented. They tore down the Qibla wall and changed it and put it back up. In that year, the new Mecca in Saudi Arabia, it flooded. And this is the Mecca we know today. It flooded, and for the first time, Mecca and Saudi produced plants, and the area turned green. It sounds like they hadn't experienced a flood in Mecca before this. Or maybe it's because it was only there for such a short time. Another change in Islam is that the location of the famous well of Zamzam had been lost, and people no longer remembered where it was. This would be speaking of the well of Zamzam in the first Mecca at Petra. In the year 91, after the Hijrah, Khalid al-Qasri became governor of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. He insisted that the office of the Caliph was the last and final word on all religious and historical matters. Anyone who disagreed was killed, even in the Haram area. These are just some things that were going on. In the year 91, Caliph Walid visited Medina, and there he chanced to meet an old man, Sa'id ibn Musayyab, who the Caliph describes as the last of the old school. That year, a covering was made to go over the Kaaba building in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. People had never seen such a thing as this before, it says. Then in the year 94, there was a great earthquake in Syria. That's 712 after AD, and Petra was affected, confirming in the minds of some that the rightness of other Qiblas and the Petra Qibla had disappeared. Al-Tabari noted that all the non-conformists were rounded up and arrested at this time. Later, it was reported that people of hypocrisy and schisms had taken refuge in Mecca, and so they were sent for, arrested, and they were killed, or they died in prison. So after Hajjaj died, it was noted that Hajjaj brought about political union in Iraq, but he had also created many religious conflicts. In the years that followed, a new faction arose, but they spread their beliefs differently. Instead of military might, they sent out missionaries throughout the Muslim world to speak to people of the religious woes of the Umayyads. These missionaries spread ideas that undermined the religious authority of the Umayyad caliphs. Wherever they were found, these missionaries were captured, tortured, and killed. But they kept on, quietly visiting people across the Middle East. By the year 128 after the Hijrah, these people, they're called the Abbasids, with their Abbasid teaching had made such inroads that Abbasid supporters were making open pilgrimages to Mecca and Saudi Arabia. In the year 125, Al-Walid bin Zayed became Caliph. He openly spoke of his immorality, his wanton escapades, his frivolous attitude to Islamic religion. He spent time pursuing sports, hunting, and drinking wine. Even though he was put to death, a great deal of damage had been done against the reputation of the caliphs. The turning point came in the year 132 at the Battle of Zab, when the Abbasids fought against the Umayyads and defeated them. The final battle took place in Hajjaj's city of Wasit. Once the battle was won, the remaining Umayyad ruling families in the kingdom were all put to death. It was a new day for Islam. From archaeological records, we can tell the Qibla question was settled once and for all. From now on, Mecca was the only accepted Qibla. Hajjaj's between mosque was destroyed, smashed to the ground, and a new mosque was built, facing the correct Qibla. Mecca and Saudi Arabia was the new Qibla. The old Qibla of Petra was never used again, never mentioned again. It passes out of history. Now, several people have written me and asked me what caused the Muslims to forget the first Qibla. Now, my opinion, and that's what it is, it's my opinion, is that shame played a major role in the changing of the Qiblas. You see, changing the Qibla from one city to another is problematic enough, but what happened was that the Umayyad caliphs did not control their religion close enough, and they allowed factions to exist. The Petra Qibla, the Mecca Qibla, the Between Qibla, the Parallel Qiblas, the African Qiblas, all of these fractured Islam. The Abbasids, however, used several tools to unite the Muslim world. First, they claimed to originate from the family of Muhammad, from the town of Humayma, only 27 kilometers south of Petra. And they had a right to claim the caliphate based on their lineage and the lineage of Muhammad. Second, their missionaries had been traveling around the Muslim world talking to people about the failures of the Umayyad Caliphate. The Abbasids stepped in to correct the wrongs of the Umayyads. The Qibla would have been one of those discussion topics, along with the debauchery and the consumption of alcohol that was common among the Umayyad families. There were lots of things that could stir up people. In the end, the Abbasids won out. Now, the issue of shame took an even greater hold on people. How could God have allowed such poor quality rulers in Islam? How could they have been divided over such basic things as the Qibla? Here is where many Western scholars struggle to understand the power of shame and honor in the Muslim world. Most Western scholars think in terms of right and wrong. This has been the basis of Western civilization since the Greek city-states. But for Islam, the struggle's never been between right and wrong. It's always been between shame and honor. Once a Westerner becomes immersed in the Middle East, he might be able to appreciate the power that this worldview holds over the region. But most Western people are so immersed in the right, wrong, guilt, innocence thinking of the West that it's hard for them to grasp. You see, in the Middle East, most decisions are made on the basis of honor and shame, not right and wrong. There are entire courses being taught around the world these days on this subject, but this is not the place to dig deeper into this subject. Perhaps, if necessary, I'll make a video on this topic, but there's lots of material out there if you look for it. Now, remember, when I mentioned that the Byzantine Patriarch Leo, in his debate with Caliph Umar, scoffed at the Muslims and mentioned that al-Hajjaj, he was a source of many of their problems, even to changing the text of the Quran. Now, this is powerful stuff. Every Muslim has been taught that he or she must protect the honor of their prophet and the honor of their religion. When attacked or mocked, the response is usually the same. In the Middle East, generally, if there's some trouble, the first thing is the whole matter is covered up. If there's shame, cover it up. Anything that could be seen as wrong or unworthy is covered up. For example, if a young woman becomes pregnant out of wedlock, her family, her tribe will quietly send her away for an abortion. Everything is covered up, and it's as if it never happened. An old Arab proverb says, "A concealed shame is 2/3 forgiven." But if things can't be concealed, then they're denied. Even if it seems obvious to everyone will accept the denial, hoping that others will also help cover up their own shame whenever it happens. In the end, denial often works because the topic will be lost and eventually it will be forgotten. However, if denial doesn't work, and if it's whispered around the community, then the source of shame must be removed. In the case of the girl who became pregnant out of wedlock, this means the family must kill their daughter in order to restore the family's honor. Abu Tumam, writing in 845 AD, said, "With the sword I will wash my shame away. Let God's doom bring on me what it may." In the case of the Qibla, covering up and denying it was sufficient because the power of the Caliphate was behind it, and the obligation was on every Muslim to protect the honor of Islam. And if people had done things dishonorably, it's covered up and it's not talked about, and we continue on as if it never happened. Within a generation or two, the memory of Petra was gone. Most Muslims had been converted into Islam under the new regime, and so the whole things that had happened back in the time of Petra, 90 years before, it was all gone. So 91 years after the founding of Islam, the Caliph noted that old man in Medina, and the Caliph had said, he's one of the last of the old school. The tradition of the Petra Qibla managed to survive a bit longer around the Petra area, but eventually it died out and it was lost. Except, as we talked about, some people remembered in China. Today, Muslim scholars use the same techniques. The Petra Qibla, the Between Qibla, the Parallel Qibla are all covered over. And if we talk about it here on YouTube, voices will rise up by those who see themselves as protectorates of the honor of Islam. Friends, this is not about logic, it's not about truth, it's not about right and wrong, it's about protecting honor. I set out years ago to discover the truth. But I discovered that many people are not interested in the truth. They are interested in keeping the status quo, preserving honor, not upsetting anyone. Now, in my experience, I have learned from the teachings of the Bible. Jesus said in John 8:31, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That is one of the teachings of Jesus. Don't be afraid of truth. Seek the truth. Know the truth. The truth will set you free. That is why we're not afraid of the truth here. We do not need to cover up the truth or deny things or fight to preserve the honor of someone or even God's honor. God will preserve his own honor. The followers of Jesus have nothing to do with this idea of preserving God's honor. He protects his own honor. We as individuals, however, need to seek to live honorable lives. And so I seek the truth, just as I seek to know God. The prophet Jeremiah revealed something from God. He spoke he said, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for your welfare, not for your evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. Then I will be found of you, says the Lord." I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been video number 5 in the series, The Qibla Story.